My name is Megan Carter. At 28, I thought I was climbing towards something brighter. Instead, I was drowning in a life I never chose. Detroit was supposed to be my reset button, a fresh start after my photography studio collapsed in Chicago. I told myself it would be temporary, just a pause before chasing the camera again. But life doesn't negotiate. It takes. It bends. It demands payment in ways you don't expect. I moved into my cousin Jessica's loft, a two-bedroom that shrank smaller every day. Her 3 kids filled every corner with noise and chaos. What began as me helping out turned into full-time motherhood without the title. I cooked, packed lunches, broke up fights, tucked them into bed while Jessica was out bartending, she claimed. Most nights, it was Vince, her bouncer boyfriend, and the reek of liquor when they finally stumbled in. 3 years blurred together. Mornings in a fog. Afternoons split between the diner and school pickups. Nights staring into a flickering laptop, forcing myself to code, praying for an exit. My dreams of golden hour photo shoots had collapsed into spilled cereal, braces, soccer uniforms, and a paycheck that vanished before the week was done. Jessica's thanks came in throwaway lines. "You're a lifesaver." But each word landed like another chain. My 20s gone. My savings gone. My name fading into a role I never auditioned for. Then came the night that cracked it all open. The door banged. Vince strutted in with takeout bags. Jessica's grin was sharp, rehearsed. "We have news," she said, eyes glittering. "We're having another baby." The words hit like glass shattering. My throat closed. My pulse pounded. Another child meant another weight shackled to me, another chapter of sacrifice written in my blood. I had already given everything: my youth, my money, my sleep. What more could I give? Jessica's reflection caught mine in the kitchen window. Her look wasn't a plea. It was an order. A dare. She expected me to keep bending, to keep disappearing. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. The outline of a woman erased from her own story. Something inside me shifted. My voice cracked not from weakness, but from the pressure of finally breaking silence. I told her I couldn't keep living like this, that I owed myself a real life. Her smile died. Vince shrugged, already bored. But in the silence that followed, I heard something louder than their judgment, my decision taking shape. This wasn't just about kids, or money, or broken dreams. It was about survival. About reclaiming myself before there was nothing left. Keep watching. Because when I finally said no, it didn't just shake the walls of that loft. It lit the fuse on everything that followed. And so, I'll ask you, if you were in my shoes, trapped in a Detroit loft carrying the weight of someone else's family, would you keep sacrificing, or would you finally walk away? The alarm never needed to ring anymore. My body woke itself at 5:15 a.m., as if it had memorized the chaos that waited on the other side of sleep. The loft was dark, only the hum of the LD fridge breaking the silence. But the second I stepped into the kids' room, silence ended. Riley, the oldest at 14, argued with Ava, 11, over the last waffle in the freezer. Their voices ricocheted against the peeling walls. Ava slammed a plate down. Riley rolled his eyes. Owen, just 7, looked wide-eyed at both of them before spilling milk all over the floor trying to grab his spoon. I grabbed a knife, cut the waffle in half, and shoved it across the table. No one thanked me. My own breakfast was half a mug of stale coffee, lukewarm and bitter, chugged like gasoline for a dying engine. By 6:30, I had them bundled into my rust-red hatchback. The car rattled at every stop sign. The heater groaned against the winter air. Riley blasted pop music. Ava complained about gym class. Owen bombarded me with questions about robots. My temples pulsed as the city blurred past, gray light bleeding through frost. That school run was my daily reminder that I lived in 2 worlds at once. The first was the frantic domestic war zone of Jessica's children. The second waited at the diner, where I swapped my title of chauffeur and mediator for waitress. Forced smiles stitched across exhaustion. Customers barked orders like I was invisible. "Make it fast," a man snapped once, as if I weren't already juggling 6 plates and a dozen checks. For $13 an hour, I performed a balancing act between humility and humiliation. The math never added up. Wages against bus passes against school snacks, School snacks against Jessica's rent. I was running in place while the ground beneath me turned to quicksand. Sociologists talk about the invisible labor women perform, how caregiving drains years of potential without acknowledgement. I didn't need a textbook to explain it. I lived it in real time. Every time I broke up a fight, every time I handed over my last $20 for Ava's art supplies, I felt that invisible hand pushing me further from the person I once hoped to become. Detroit outside was another story, a city both alive and scarred. I'd catch glimpses of murals painted on abandoned factories, children walking to school past liquor stores and pawn shops. The resilience of the place was undeniable, but so was the weight pressing down on its people. In that backdrop, I blended in. Another woman hustling 2 jobs, burning at both ends, surviving rather than living. By the time I picked the kids up after school, exhaustion had settled in my bones like cement. The ride home was a rerun of complaints and static-filled songs. At the loft, I cooked chili on the cheap, its smell filling the kitchen while Riley asked if he could borrow money for a school trip. Ava sulked about homework, and Owen begged me to watch him build with Legos. Dinner wasn't conversation, it was negotiation. Who would feed the cat? Who had to do dishes? Who would stop shouting first? Jessica would sweep in later, tossing off a hollow, "You're a lifesaver," before collapsing on the couch or heading back out with Vince. Her praise was a leash disguised as gratitude, a reminder that I was useful only when I erased myself. Nights were the only hours that belonged to me. After the kids drifted into uneasy sleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table, laptop glowing against the darkness. Coding lessons scrolled across the screen, words I barely absorbed through my fatigue. My body begged for rest, but I clung to those lessons like a lifeline, convinced they were the only exit from this cycle. Still, each keystroke was heavy, each assignment late. The dream of becoming a software developer shimmered like a mirage just out of reach. The truth was brutal. Mornings were chaos, days were servitude, nights were survival. And in between, Megan Carter was vanishing. The question haunted me every dawn as I wiped spilled milk from the floor. How many more mornings would I endure before something broke for good? Nightfall used to be my sanctuary, the single stretch of hours that belonged to me alone. By the time the kids were finally asleep, Riley scrolling on his phone until his eyelids drooped, Ava curled up with her sketchbook still clutched in her hands, Owen murmuring questions to himself. Even in dreams the loft would quiet. For the first time all day, I could hear my own breath. But peace was an illusion. The table in the corner became my battlefield. A chipped Formica surface, the hum of the refrigerator at my back, and a laptop that overheated so often I kept a small desk fan blowing at it just to keep the screen alive. At 11 p.m., when most people were closing their eyes, I opened new tabs. HTML, Python, CSS. My fingers stumbled over code like a beginner learning piano. Some nights, the logic clicked and I felt powerful. Other nights, I stared at the error messages until the words blurred and my head hit the keyboard. The diner uniform still reeked of grease on my shoulders. The ache in my legs from a 12-hour day refused to fade. And yet I forced myself to keep going, because I believed, maybe foolishly, that if I could learn to code, I could rewrite my future line by line, function by function. Statistics became my cruel comfort. I'd read that more than 45% of women in America considered switching careers by their early 30s, chasing stability in industries like tech. A 2023 Pew study said nearly 60% of low-wage workers were women, most juggling childcare on top of jobs that barely covered rent. I was part of those numbers, another dot on a graph. But numbers didn't capture how it felt to watch your 20s evaporate while you carried a family that wasn't yours. I thought of my camera sometimes, tucked away in the closet, collecting dust. Photography had once been the language through which I spoke to the world. Framing light, catching raw emotion, it had given me purpose. Now it felt like another life. My dream dissolved into practical survival. Code well enough, earn enough, break free. Art was replaced by utility. Passion was buried under necessity. Still, the kids' faces tethered me to this makeshift existence. Riley with his razor-sharp wit, cracking jokes to mask his hurt. Ava, drawing delicate worlds no one else noticed, her silence screaming louder than words. Owen, asking why the stars moved across the sky, as if curiosity could protect him from chaos. I loved them more than I wanted to admit. That love became another chain, binding me tighter to Jessica's mess. Jessica and Vince rarely saw the cost. To them, I was background noise, the reliable figure who filled the gaps while they drifted from shift to bar to bed. Vince contributed nothing except a shrug. Jessica offered the occasional, "You're their rock." It sounded like praise, but it was more like ownership. You're their rock, which meant you don't get to move. You don't get to dream. You don't get to leave. My eyes would blur at 1 a.m., code dissolving into gibberish. I'd slam the laptop shut, the glow lingering like a taunt, whispering that I was already behind, that others my age were buying houses, traveling, living. Meanwhile, I was calculating whether my tips could cover next week's groceries. But every night, before I dragged myself into bed, I promised myself I wouldn't quit. Because quitting meant this was all there would ever be. I refused to accept that. Somewhere in that haze, I clung to the fragile belief that freedom could still be built, even if I had to carve it out in the dead of night. What I didn't know was that my breaking point wasn't in the late night hours. It was waiting just beyond them, in daylight, when Jessica would demand more than I could ever give. There's a strange kind of silence that follows years of giving yourself away piece by piece. It isn't peaceful, it's hollow. By the 4th year of living in Jessica's loft, I could feel that silence wrapping around me like a fog. Every task, every sacrifice blurred into the next until I no longer recognized who I was outside of their needs. I adored those kids. I won't pretend otherwise. Riley's sharp humor, Ava's quiet artistry, Owen's bottomless curiosity, they reminded me that life still held sparks of wonder. But no matter how deeply I cared, the truth clawed at me. I wasn't their mother. I was the placeholder, the unpaid stand-in, the invisible scaffolding propping up a family that would crumble without me. And as much as Jessica told me, "You're their rock," her words were chains. Being the rock meant I wasn't allowed to move, to dream, to live. The mirror became a stranger. My reflection showed a woman with dark circles like bruises beneath her eyes, hair perpetually tied back, skin grayed from exhaustion. Once I had walked into rooms with a camera slung across my shoulder, hungry to frame life in golden light. Now I trudged into diners and parent-teacher meetings, my camera locked in a closet, a relic of the woman I had been. In sociology, they talk about the second shift, the unpaid labor mostly women carry after their jobs. For me, it was the only shift that ever seemed to matter. The kids saw me as steady. The customers saw me as disposable. Jessica saw me as convenient. But no one saw Megan Carter. She was dissolving in the background, her edges fading until she was more role than person. Some nights, when the kids were asleep and my laptop screen flickered, I'd pause mid-code and think, is this it? Is this the life I traded everything for? Dreams of building an app, of freelancing, of maybe one day running my own small studio again, they felt like distant postcards from a world I'd never reach. I told myself hard work would eventually tip the scales, but each day weighed heavier than the last. Even the city mirrored my unraveling. Detroit was filled with echoes of ambition and collapse. Skyscrapers abandoned, murals painted on crumbling walls, neighborhoods stitched together by resilience alone. I saw myself in those buildings, still standing but hollowed, painted over with borrowed colors. And Jessica, she had the audacity to treat my sacrifices as normal. She would breeze in at dawn, the smell of smoke and beer clinging to her jacket, muttering that Vince had a rough night bouncing at the bar. She'd toss me a distracted thanks, then collapse, leaving me to corral kids, bills, and chaos all over again. It was as though she believed this arrangement had been written into my DNA, that my role was to serve while she lived recklessly free. I began to wonder if invisibility could kill a person more slowly than hunger or cold. To lose your identity, your voice, your place in your own story, what's left of you? My friends called less, their messages buried under unanswered threads. I didn't know what to tell them. I'm fine, I'd type, but fine was a lie. Fine meant vanishing. The final straw hadn't arrived yet, but I could feel it looming like thunder in the distance. Something was going to break either me or this life. The question was, which one would shatter first? And deep down, I already knew. I wasn't built to be invisible forever. The more Jessica demanded, the more the hollow silence inside me threatened to erupt. How long can a person keep sacrificing before they disappear completely? And what happens when the silence finally cracks wide open? It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night where exhaustion thickened the air. I'd just finished another 12-hour shuffle between the diner and homework duty, chili simmering on the stove while Riley argued with Ava about screen time. Owen sat cross-legged on the floor, humming to himself, building robots out of mismatched Legos. The loft felt cramped, but in its chaos, I had learned to survive. Then Jessica and Vince walked in. They weren't tired. They weren't drained. They looked triumphant. Vince tossed greasy takeout bags onto the counter as if he'd won a prize, his grin wide, while Jessica practically glowed. "We've got news," she said, her voice pitching high with excitement. I knew before the words left her lips. "We're having another baby." The chili spoon slipped from my fingers, clattering against the pot. My stomach twisted in knots so tight I could barely breathe. Another baby meant another body to feed, another schedule to manage, another childhood laid at my feet. I had already surrendered my 20s, my career, my savings. The thought of giving more felt impossible, like being asked to hold my breath underwater forever. "That's huge," I muttered, forcing my face into something resembling joy. Inside, I was unraveling. But the real blow came after dinner, when Jessica leaned across the table, her tone shifting from excitement to expectation. "We need you to quit the diner," she said matter-of-factly. "You should be here full-time for the kids. And maybe chip in. Like $200 for utilities. It's only fair." The words hung in the air like a storm. "Quit my job?" My voice cracked, half in disbelief, half in fury. Vince shrugged, slouching back in his chair. "We're slammed. The new baby's coming. We can't manage without you." Something snapped in me. Years of swallowed resentment rose like fire in my throat. I slammed my palm against the table. "I'm already doing everything. Driving, cooking, homework, laundry. I can't give up my job too. That diner paycheck is the only thing keeping me afloat." Jessica's eyes hardened into shards of ice. "You live here free, Megan. You owe us. You owe me." Those words seared into me. Oh. As if the last 3 years had been debt unpaid. As if every sleepless night, every dollar funneled into braces or cleats or sketchbooks hadn't been enough. As if love itself was currency to be collected and counted. I stood trembling, hands clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. My voice, raw and shaking, finally broke through. "No, I don't owe you. I owe myself a life." For a moment, silence flooded the loft. The kids froze, watching, sensing the air crackle with something they didn't yet have words for. Vince smirked, already dismissing me. Jessica glared with a fury that could have set the walls on fire. That night, lying awake on the couch, I replayed the words over and over. "Quit the diner. Chip in. Owe us." Her ultimatum had been clear. Erase yourself completely or lose the fragile shelter you've built. And for the first time, I felt the truth like lightning in my chest. I couldn't do it anymore. If I stayed, I would disappear. The tension had boiled into something volcanic. And I knew, sooner than later, it would erupt. Tell me this. If your own cousin handed you that ultimatum, would you surrender your future or would you walk into the storm and fight for yourself? The night after Jessica's ultimatum, I called Quinn, my oldest friend, pacing the length of the loft while the kids slept. The words tumbled out of me like a confession. The endless chores, the invisible labor, the crushing demand that I give up the little independence I still clung to. Quinn didn't hesitate. "They're leeching off you, Megan. You're not their parent. You've got to save yourself before there's nothing left." Her bluntness stung, but it was the sting of truth. For years, I had convinced myself that staying was noble, that sacrifice equaled love. But Quinn's voice cut through the fog. If I stayed, I wasn't noble. I was trapped. The next day, between diner shifts and pickup duty, I sat in the corner of the coffee shop with my laptop open to rental listings. Studio apartments in Detroit weren't cheap, but I had just enough in what little remained of my savings to cover the deposit on a $1,300 place. Bare walls, maybe a single window, but it would be mine. The thought of 4 blank walls felt less suffocating than the chaos of Jessica's loft. The hardest part wasn't money. It was the kids. One evening, I found Riley scrolling on his phone, pretending not to care about anything. I sat beside him and forced myself to speak. "I might move out," I said softly. His head jerked up, suspicion clouding his teenage eyes. "Because of Mom?" I nodded. "But I'll still be here for you. Just differently." I showed him how to plan dinners, how to track Owen's soccer schedule on his phone calendar, how to remind Ava about her sketchbook assignments. He rolled his eyes, but when I pressed a grocery list into his hand, he held it tighter than he realized. With Ava, it was quieter. I left her a new sketch pad I'd bought with my tips. She didn't say much, but she drew a picture of me standing tall, holding her hand, and slipped it under my pillow. Owen clung to my waist when I tucked him in, asking, "Will you still come to my games?" I promised I would, though my voice trembled under the weight of promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Jessica sensed the shift like an animal catching the scent of escape. One night, she caught me scrolling through rental photos on my phone. "Ditching us already," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. Her words dripped with venom, but I stayed quiet. Because if I answered, I'd give away how close I was to leaving. The decision crystallized in silence, not in confrontation. I started packing little by little. My camera, unused but precious. My worn notebook of coding assignments. A sweater Quinn had given me in college. I hid them in a box under the bed, preparing for a departure I hadn't yet announced. I knew leaving would tear something in the kids, but staying would destroy me. And maybe, in the long run, my leaving would teach them something too, that love isn't about erasing yourself, that boundaries matter, that sometimes walking away is the only way to save your own soul. Detroit's streets outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside me. Sirens wailing in the distance, headlights cutting through cracked pavement, murals of fists and phoenixes painted across abandoned walls. I imagined myself as one of those phoenixes, ashes still clinging, but wings beginning to spread. The night I signed the lease online, my hands trembled, but not with fear. It was something fiercer, something long buried. For the first time in years, I was making a choice for myself, not for Jessica, not for the kids, not for anyone else. What would you have done? Cling to the role forced upon you, or gamble everything on a bare apartment and the fragile promise of freedom? I moved out on a gray Saturday morning. The kind where the sky felt heavy with judgment. My new studio was nothing more than 4 bare walls and a second-hand mattress, but when I dropped my box of belongings onto the floor, the echo felt like freedom. My laptop sat on the counter, humming with possibility. For the first time in years, I had a space that belonged to me alone. I had barely started unpacking when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe. "This is Officer Grant, Chicago PD," a voice said, flat and professional. My heart sank. "We received a vandalism complaint at your cousin's address. You've been listed." By the time I drove back to Jessica's loft, the street was lit up with flashing red and blue. My stomach churned as I climbed the stairs. Jessica stood in the doorway, screaming, her finger stabbing the air like a dagger. She trashed my TV. She stole $300. Her fury was volcanic, spewing lies with every word. Vince loomed behind her, arms crossed, smirking as if he'd already won. Inside, the officers examined a cracked flat screen and a dishwasher jammed with dishes. My pulse raced. The narrative was slipping away, and I had nothing but my truth. My voice felt small against Jessica's roar. Then Riley stepped forward. His shoulders stiff, his voice steady in a way I'd never heard before. "That TV's been broken for weeks," he said. "Owen threw a toy at it. The dishwasher? Mom overloaded it. And the money? She spent it on bar tabs." The room froze. Owen nodded vigorously. Ava, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, whispered, "She's telling the truth." Jessica's jaw dropped, her fury faltering as the weight of her own children's words crushed her accusations. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them spoke evenly. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a serious offense. This is your warning." Jessica's glare darted from me to the kids, a silent war of betrayal burning in her eyes, but she said nothing more. The officers left, and the tension bled out of the room like smoke after a fire. I turned to Riley, my throat tight. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. You've been more mom than she ever was. It was a sentence that cut both ways, fierce validation, but also a wound. Because I wasn't supposed to be their mother. And yet, here I was, the one they trusted when everything else collapsed. Walking out of that loft for the last time, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the childhood they were still losing, for the mother they barely had. Relief that I had finally broken free, that my name had survived Jessica's firestorm intact. Back in my studio, the air smelled of dust and possibility. My laptop glowed with freelance coding work waiting for me. Quinn dropped by with takeout and a hug that said more than words. I sent the kids $30 that month for supplies, a tiny lifeline. Not enough to save them, but enough to remind them I hadn't vanished. The fallout was immediate. Vince disappeared within weeks, leaving Jessica flailing. Her bar job cut her hours, and the loft grew quieter, lonelier. Meanwhile, I secured a contract, building a small app for a Detroit startup, $1,200, that felt like the world had finally cracked open. The chaos had climaxed, but I knew the aftershocks weren't over. Jessica would strike again, one way or another. People like her didn't surrender control easily. So I ask you, when someone you love turns the law into a weapon against you, do you fight back or do you let the truth, and the loyalty of the innocent, speak for you? Freedom didn't feel like fireworks or champagne. It felt like the hum of my secondhand refrigerator, the glow of my laptop screen, the echo of my footsteps in a studio so empty I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, the space around me was silent, not the suffocating silence of invisibility, but the clean slate of possibility. My days found a new rhythm. I woke without the chaos of spilled cereal or shouting siblings, brewed coffee just for myself, and sat down at my desk with nothing but code waiting. Freelance projects trickled in bug fixes for small websites, design tweaks, then, finally, a contract to help a Detroit startup build an app. $1,200 for a month of work. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I had ever earned from something that felt like mine. My studio hummed with coffee, lines of code, and the low thrum of determination. Quinn visited often, her laughter filling the bare walls, bringing warmth where furniture had not yet arrived. She reminded me that I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was beginning again. Together, we set up a calendar for the kids' soccer games and art shows. So even if I wasn't under Jessica's roof, I could still show up where it mattered. The kids adapted in their own ways. Riley FaceTimed me late at night, his sarcasm slipping just long enough for me to see the hurt behind it. Ava sent me photos of her sketches, delicate portraits of birds, cityscapes, even one of me, drawn with lines so careful they nearly broke my heart. Owen called with breathless updates about Robotics Club, his eyes shining with the same curiosity that had once bombarded me with questions in the car. They were resilient, but I knew they were paying a price. Jessica was still their mother, but she wasn't mothering. Meanwhile, Jessica's life cracked under its own weight. Vince vanished, leaving behind nothing but his smirk in my memory. The bar cut her hours, bills piled up, and the loft that once vibrated with chaos grew quiet. Neighbors whispered, and word trickled back to me. Jessica was slipping. The woman who once barked orders and ultimatums now stumbled under her own neglect. She texted me once, a single message that flashed across my screen like a ghost. You owe me. 2 words. A demand as hollow as her promises had always been. My thumb hovered, but instead of responding, I blocked her number. The leash was severed. And yet, guilt shadowed me. I lay awake some nights, staring at the ceiling of my studio, wondering if leaving had condemned the kids to a harsher life. Had I abandoned them, or had I saved myself so that one day I could be strong enough to help them in ways Jessica never could? The line blurred, twisting in my chest. Detroit outside seemed to mirror my transformation. The same streets where I once trudged, head down, now looked alive with murals of fists raised high, phoenixes painted across the shells of abandoned factories. I saw myself in those birds burned. Yes, but rising. Not reborn in brilliance, but inch by inch, breath by breath. My contract work grew into steady income. The diner was behind me, grease-stained uniforms tossed away. Instead of tips that barely covered bus fare, I now had invoices, deposits, and the fragile dignity of being paid for my mind instead of my exhaustion. Slowly, I bought a real desk, a chair that didn't squeak, and curtains to soften the echo of my bare studio. And still, the kids remained my tether. I sent small amounts each month, $30 here, $40 there, never enough to fix their world, but enough to remind them that someone out there was thinking of them. Quinn became a safety net, watching them when Jessica spiraled too far, proof that family could be chosen as much as inherited. The final lesson came one night, as I coded late, the glow of my screen lighting up the quiet. Riley's words replayed in my mind. "You've been more mom than she ever was." I realized then that motherhood, family, love, none of it is defined by blood alone. It's defined by presence, by sacrifice, by the choices we make when no one else will. But love, too, has boundaries. And my boundary was survival. Sometimes I still wonder what the future holds. Will Jessica ever admit her failures? Will the kids grow up resenting me for leaving? Or will they understand why I had to? Will I ever pick up my camera again, capture light instead of just code? The questions linger, unanswered. But for the first time, I'm okay with not knowing. Because I've learned something vital. Freedom doesn't always come in triumph. Sometimes it comes in small, steady breaths, in rented studios, in coffee brewed for one. Sometimes freedom is simply choosing yourself after years of being told you don't matter. So I'll leave you with this. If you had carried someone else's life on your back until your own almost vanished, would you keep sacrificing in the name of love, or would you finally rise, even if it meant walking away?